are really about is all around how the right customer experience can reduce cost and drive revenue. There's lots of organizations that think that, you know, defining a customer experience strategy is something, you know, it's fluffy, it's woolly, it's what the brand teams want to do. But actually the right customer experience strategy can take cost out of your organization. You know, it's stopping the dumb things that customers don't want you to do, and it's stopping the dumb things in most cases that your colleagues don't want you to do. So it does take cost out, and ultimately, if you focus in on the things that matter most to customers, then ultimately you will drive revenues, whether that be a B2B or a B2C business. Chapter 2 that we're going to talk about is how you then create a sustainable customer experience strategy and a plan using accelerated and agile methodologies to deliver that. So accelerated delivery and agile is not just about, you know, what IT can do. It's actually using those methodologies across the whole organization. And that's one of the things we're doing with Northern Gas Networks at the moment. So we'll talk about a sustainable plan and not a one-hit wonder in terms of something that organizations do for a couple of years. And then the final thing is around the third chapter is about how we link employee engagement then to customer engagement and user experience. So it's about linking all three of those things together. So if we click over the page, what I thought it was worth sharing actually is because of this, we've had a lot of challenges over the years actually, particularly from CEOs and finance directors or CFOs around what is it going to pay? You know, are there any dividends in us really driving and investing in a great customer experience? It feels like the right thing to do, but actually, is it going to give us any return? And I would say, being in this industry or in this specific skill set now for over sort of 10, 15 years, that 10, 15 years ago, it was really difficult to quantify the return. The good news now is certainly there's been a study that's been done of S&P 500, of the S&P 500 out in the US. And what that study showed is that customer experience leaders, those that led in terms of customer experience scores, so those with high satisfaction and a high net promoter score, actually saw returns in terms of 77% plus. Those that were middle of the pack that hadn't invested in customer experience were seeing a 51.5% return. And the laggards, so those that, you know, didn't care about it at all and were doing nothing at all to deliver a customer experience strategy, were seeing a minus 2.5. So, you know, there's clear studies there that have been completed by Watermark Consulting, as I say, for the US. For those colleagues that are based in the UK CSI, which is one of the probably well understood now and most rigorous and robust studies again of CSAT, customer satisfaction and NPS. They've studied major organisations in the UK for over 20 years, and there's a significant market share growth as well as profitability that's been driven out of the top 10 companies, those brand names such as John Lewis, Waitrose, Pret-a-Manger. So again, these studies here in the UK as well as the US that support that. And then the final piece, there's some other research that's been done, and they have suggested that 76%, this is a survey of consumers, end consumers, and 76% of consumers said they would actually pay 5% more for a better experience. 55% said they'd pay 10% more. And I think, you know, we've all probably got our own personal stories of where we've had really poor experiences in the past or even recently. And, you know, we probably would pay a little bit more just to get, you know, that seamless experience and one that makes it easier for us. So, you know, definite studies there now to prove that it does return and therefore the investments made will pay dividends. Again, one of the things that we're also asking, one of the things where businesses can fail is that they're not clear about what customer experience strategy they're trying to create. And what we mean by that is, you know, if you're, for example, a low-cost airline, are you really going to create differentiated experiences? So it really depends on what is the proposition, what are you setting out to do, and what are you going to articulate to your customers, and then making sure that everybody's delivering against that. Where businesses again tend to fail is they're not clear about what they're trying to be. And for argument's sake, you're a low-cost airline, but you think you want to provide, or customers think you're going to provide differentiated experiences. Where we see almost the range of experiences are, you've got businesses that sit in the almost random experiences, things, it's very process driven, there's very little measurement or even no measurement at all, lots of unintended consequences, and it's almost like stuff just happens. Therefore, you could have an experience with that organization, and then the next time you go to that organization, whether it be a retailer, an airline, a telco, something different happens. So, they've got this almost what we would describe as a customer experience plan or strategy where it's just about random experiences. There's no consistency in what they do. Moving up the chain is around what we describe as intentional experiences. So they are quite clear about the vision. They will fix and own the problem when they come across a problem. So say a customer phones into the contact centre. They have got some measurement programs in place, and they do see change as a project. So, they've got quite lengthy project plans to get issues resolved or to make the experiences better. But at least they have got what we call intentional experiences. And then moving up the chain to differentiated experiences. And we could probably all think about the companies, that spring to mind when we think, wow, that really made a difference. They lived and breathed their brand promise, everything they did. It's easy to do business. Some may argue that Amazon, is moving up to a branded experiences. They really do fix customer mistakes before mistakes happen. The Jeff Bezos mantra of, the best service is no service. And actually, we should be fixing the issue before a customer realizes there was even a problem in the first place. So very clear brand promise, and changes are continuous. And this is where, certainly some of the agile and accelerated delivery principles play through, in that it's all about continuous improvement. We're constantly collaborating and constantly working out how to evolve ourselves. There's two other bars on that chart. One's around almost where the basic expectation is, and one where you can exceed expectation, moving up to the differentiated experiences. The biggest challenge we've got today now with the advent of digitization and the way in which, we as consumers now are all consuming products and using services, is that the bar's constantly rising. So it's getting harder and harder to deliver those differentiated experiences. And therefore, as I say, the biggest question for an organization is truly around what should you be delivering and what should you be designing. Not every company should be moving towards differentiated experiences. So, Paul, just to check in, are we going to take questions throughout, or do you want us to just continue then and pause at certain points for breath?
We have plenty of time. If folks want to interrupt you with questions, they're welcome to do so. It's up to you, really.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do either. So if anybody does have a question, please shout or wave your hand at us if you've still got your camera on. Over the page, what we thought we'd do is just share, and because it's always easy to share slides, but it's much better to talk about businesses that we've worked with and where we've seen actually almost sort of different types of things starting to happen. 3 different case studies we thought we'd bring to life. One, what was the challenge? What was the CX focus? And then the difference that it made. The first one was a very historic and legacy-based UK catalogue and online retailer, one of the largest in the UK. Their biggest challenge 5-6 years ago is that they, at the time, were serving customers to the tune of about 18% of what they did transactionally was online. In terms of retail in the UK at the time, retail UK was around 30% mark. As I say, we're going back about 5-6 years ago. So their big challenge, and the big challenge they set as an organisation, is they wanted to shift the business from what was, as I say, a traditional store and catalogue retailer to an 80% online retailer, because they recognised that's the way customers were shifting. And they also recognised that's the way that they could grow the product set that they wanted to offer. because it was very difficult to get all of that product, 30, 40,000 SKUs, that's different items of product, into a catalogue, which was virtually becoming like a brick that landed. You couldn't actually get it through the letterbox. It was that heavy. So they needed to move online as well. So they set the challenge around from 18% to 80%. At the time, they were receiving 500,000 calls per week into their contact centres. They had numerous contact centres all over the UK. They had absolutely no customer measures in place. There was no customer research program. They weren't checking in with what customers wanted or what was important to them. And from an EBITDA perspective, the shareholders had set a challenge of driving an additional 115 million of EBITDA. So there was lots of different challenges being almost thrown into the melting pot around, we want to be more digital. We've got to take cost out of the business. We have to improve satisfaction, and we certainly need to reduce calls that are coming into the contact centre, into the call centres. So what did customer experience highlight, and what did that CX focus highlight? Through the research that we did and the work that we did and the analytics, what we proved was that 80% of the calls that were actually coming in were from customers where it added no value to the customer and no value to the organisation. They were actually phoning about that dumb stuff, things in the process that had broken down. So where things on the website weren't working, product was missing, it wasn't quite how it looked online, the delivery hadn't turned up on the right day, or they'd been sent a text message telling them of a different day they were expecting. So, a whole host of things across that journey where it was broken. Only 20% of the contacts that were coming in were what we described as added value to both the customer and the organisation. So those are the things that you would want to retain and ultimately try and drive revenues up. A lot of the processes were broken, which was contributing to the poor customer experience. And certainly when we started to measure customer satisfaction, those scores were quite low, and they had a negative net promoter score. Very little MI telling them what was going on, and very little, virtually no insight in terms of how they were going to drive those improvements through. So we set about in terms of defining and designing what that customer experience was going to be to support the ambition of the business, 80% online. We then devised the processes, the technology stack, and the way of delivering it through, what we call agile and accelerated delivery. We chunked that up into 90 to 100-day plans and delivered that over a 2-year period. What did it result in? Well, costs were reduced by 68 million, revenues grown by 86 million. The CSAT scores went up 26 percentage points over a 2-year period. And probably most important, and the thing I was most passionate about, was actually the employee satisfaction. Low place, people were quite disenfranchised and disengaged. That went up by 40 percentage points over a 2-year period. So, a successful story there, and supporting what I said right at the start. You can take cost out whilst improving both customer satisfaction and colleague satisfaction. So that was the online catalogue and retail story. Unless, has anyone got any questions on that? Because I'm going to hand over to Jerry now to just talk through the energy company and the software manufacturer.
No,
over to you,
okay.
Jerry.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Nicola. So the energy company, so this is in the UK, it's one of the big 6 retail energy companies. And this case study we looked at was from their small business side of things, but that was part of the problem to start with, in that their definition of small business was everything from one person who runs a cafe through to a 50-site call center. So and their customer experiences are going to be what they need are going to be very, very different. The other, the background to this and why they were having so many problems was that they'd, on the residential side of the organisation, they'd put in a new system, a new customer management system, and they'd replicated that on the business side as well. But what they hadn't accounted for were the unintended consequences that Nicola referred to a few minutes ago, around the bills that didn't have the appropriate tax information. And if you did have 50 sites There was no way of having one consolidated bill. So there was a lot of background activity going on, which led to they were getting between 27 and 30,000 calls a month, which compared to the online retailer that Nicola talked about is fairly small scale, but everything else was that much smaller. So they were struggling to cope with these calls. They didn't have any real customer measures. So it was a typical call center, average handling time, number of calls answered during the day, and so on. So there was no real insight. But the other thing that we found was that teams, they weren't talking to each other. And it really did not come as a surprise that 3/4 of the calls they were having were what we call rework. So in other words, these are unnecessary calls because there were people ringing in saying, I don't understand my bill. So these are all things that are within control of that organization. I don't understand my bill. You've confused me. You haven't rung me back when you said you would. You've lost my paperwork. I was on hold for you were going to put me through to somebody, and then that just disappeared. So I'm ringing back in again, and so an incredible 3/4 of the calls was rework. The processes were obviously broken. The amount of duplicated effort was horrendous, but the mindset was one of well, that's just the way it is. So we were able to go in quite quickly and say, well, if you fix a small number of things that have a big impact, you can make some immediate savings. And say 14,000 a month doesn't sound much, but this is a fairly small operation. But it was very, very quickly they got to that point just by making the experiences right, by sharing information, by talking to colleagues, by understanding what each other did in the business. And as a result of that, the employee engagement started to rise. In a few minutes, we'll come on to that as a particular case study. But what was really interesting was comparing that mindset with another energy company, one of the challenger energy companies in the UK, who was saying the other day that their mindset is they think like a service company, they then think like a technology company, and then they think like an energy company. Whereas this one that we've just been talking about was very much, we're an energy company first. So we're all about nuclear power, or we're all about this. And it just showed in the customer experience. And no surprise, the new challenger is winning customers. These guys are losing customers, and it's easy to see why. Over on the right-hand side, software manufacturer, just that's a work in progress, so we haven't got the final numbers, but the point there is the same, in that there was a real complacency about what it was really like to be one of their customers. They're a B2B, they're operating a niche market. They only had 20 customers at the most, but their processes were so complex that even their people were throwing their arms up and saying, it just isn't good. They were tripping over themselves. They were most proud when they were fixing problems that actually shouldn't have happened in the first place. What the customer experience focus showed was not necessarily that any of the issues were new, but the depth of emotion behind those feelings. So customers were tolerating their being a customer of this organization. They were using words like, I can't believe they got away with this business model for so long. And so the customer experience, that's not a customer experience you want to create as an intentional experience. But they had no sight of that. So complacency was taking over, and they were reliant on operating in a niche market. And what's happening now is that other people are coming into the market. The product, as with anything really, the product and the service side of things are very easily replicable. The experience is the bit that's going to make the difference, and that's the bit that's happening now in that organization. They've got a bit of cultural change going on. They've realized that they need to do more to nurture and protect the relationships they've got before they go on to develop new customers.
Jerry,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you with a question. Nicola, you can respond to this as well. The personnel that you tend to work with to do the assessments, to get buy-in, the customer experience, is in fact something that needs work. Can you describe how you bring these people together and get them all thinking that this is an effort that they need to pay attention to and devote resources to?
Yeah. Fact-based evidence is and bringing this stuff to life is probably the most important aspect. So we will, if we've been asked to help an organization, there's obviously somebody there who has recognized they need to do things differently. They need to have there needs to be a change. And that person may not necessarily sit on the board. They may be in a middle management level, but that's the if you like, the hook. And then we give them the evidence. So we will help them uncover what it's really like to be a customer. We will tell customer stories, and we'll play it back in a way that starts pricking the conscience, if you like, of the people who need to sponsor this work at a high level. We've just been doing some work with a pharmaceutical company who, they're a massive global organization, but it's just taken one person to acknowledge that actually things need to be different, and he has then worked his way through the organization using the kind of evidence to say, look, do we defining our customers? Do we know who our customers are? Do we know, does everybody in the organization know what we're about? So he's used that kind of evidence to show that actually, things aren't as hunky-dory as the board think they are, to start getting a bit of momentum. So it's kind of step by step, but you kind of, you win that engagement, you win the buy-in by showing how the focus on customer experience can support the finance director's goals, the operations director's goals, the risk director's goals.
Jerry, I'm just going to jump in because I'm just conscious there's a couple of other people that have got questions as well. So Nick B, you've asked about how did the energy company share the information around the business and also start to change the culture? It probably ties in a little bit with the question that Paul asked then, in that what we ensure we do it actually through an interview process is we make sure that we actually almost do a slice of people down the organisation, from the senior people at the top to people that are working with customers out on the road or in the call centres and so on. So what we then do is make sure we then feed that back. So we do lots of interaction on the floor. We do lots of interaction in workshops. We tend to ask for people that we then go on to call experience makers, and try to change them, almost change them in the sense that we're educating them in some of the agile and accelerated customer experience ways of working. So I hope that answers your question, Nick. And I know, Saul, you've got a question as well.
Hi, Nicola. Thanks very much, Saul. You've described a couple of cases there. One seems to be like a channel shift proposition, one moving somebody from using one channel to another. Another one which is about business process re-engineering, where you're looking at where the process inefficiencies are and why they come. I was wondering, do you get issues or challenges when the thinking about the customer experience issues and the limitations of the customer experience bleeds into the fact that it's the wrong service that's being offered, and therefore you have to enter into a kind of service redesign mode?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to be fair, we came across that in the catalogue and online retailer, in that some of the actual, not only the products, but some of the propositions around financial services we were offering were actually the wrong things. So, and what was really important is that we actually looked at not only what satisfied a customer, but actually what mattered most and what was the most important. And often what you find is what's most important to the customer is not what the company thinks is most important. So we went through a whole shift then of trying to demonstrate what the return on investment would be around shifting to some of these almost new services and products, away from the legacy of, well, we've got thousands of them in the warehouses, surely we've bought them, so we need to sell them. So there was quite a challenge that went on for some time, and eventually over time, lots of people around the organisation started to then almost understand, what's important to customers. You know what? They'll start to buy more of it. They'll do it more often, and they'll tell more of the friends. So, we were able to demonstrate the returns.
And same with the software manufacturer as well. That they had 2 release dates a year, and they thought that was a good customer experience. So their customers were only able to develop their business at the rate of the software manufacturer, and obviously 2 releases a year wasn't enough. So that was quite a hard message for them to hear, because they were very, very wedded to the 2 release dates. They were also had no idea either that in their call centers there were something like 50-60% of their calls were going unanswered, and again, they're not huge volumes. So yeah, sometimes the messages are hard to hear. One of the guys in the software manufacturer said it was spectacularly uncomfortable to hear, but he took it in the right spirit, and they're doing something about it. So
Cole, I think Cole's got a question as well. Sorry, Jerry, I'm just
sorry, I can't see those.
Cole's typed one as well. Cole.
Yeah, can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Jerry. Oh, dog in the room. The case studies you talked about are kind of, no, I don't want to overgeneralize, but you've got kind of a low volume, high value client around the software space, and you've got moderately high volume, low value clients around the energy companies and the catalog retailers. And I just wondered, you guys have obviously got, as I know from working with Nicola, you've got huge amounts of experience in this space. But I just wondered whether, when you go into those different types of clients, whether your fundamental approach is different. So, for example, compared to, a catalog and online retailer, where you've got a very high volume of sales, but they're relatively low volume items, compared to, hypothetically, say you're approached by somebody like Bentley. Would your fundamental approach be different in the way that you'd look at the work that you'd need to do?
Not really, Col. I understand what you're saying, but almost not really, because the framework that we've got and that we use, really highlights, say, what's your business strategy? Be really clear about that. What does that mean to your proposition? And for Bentley, they've got a very clear business strategy and a very clear proposition. But then you start to look at, right, okay, so your brand proposition is clear. Are you really clear about what your customer experience strategy is? And if we were to go and ask, somebody who's on the front line in terms of manufacturing those vehicles, are they clear? Are your customers clear? Are your suppliers clear? So, I think the framework and approach that you can use can be consistent. The fact-based may differ. So the fact-based on a very high volume business, there's probably going to be almost more low-hanging fruit versus, say, for example, the software manufacturer with only 7 or 8, high-value clients. The fact base of the volumes coming in was very different. What we had to do was more almost qualitative research than we did quant research. So I think very long-winded way of saying the framework can stay the same. We just might pull slightly different levers, more or less, depending on the value and the volume that's going through the organisation.
Guys, I want to give you a time check. Excuse me. You have about 20 minutes to go. I'll give you another time check when you've got 10 minutes left.
Okay. There's another question just come in from Mariana. So, Mariana, do you want to ask the question, or do you want me to ask it? I know you've just typed it in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi there.
Yeah, great. Hi. Basically, I just wanted to see, in your experience, have you noticed a shift in the market in terms of companies, now pulling more on your solutions in terms of wanting a customer experience strategy, employee experience, understanding the value, or is it still a bit of a push? And what do you think has or will cause the shift, depending on what you've noticed, basically?
Yeah, I think if you'd have asked that question, say 5 years ago, I would have said it was still very push. There were almost few people in few organisations who believed this stuff, and believed it could make a difference. We're definitely starting to see more almost companies now pulling, and certainly wanting to look at both the customer experience and the colleague experience. are we seeing almost a landslide, a tsunami of it? No, we're not. And I think there's still a lot of organisations actually that should do more of that, because it does, back to the point, it does pay dividends, and there definitely are returns. I think, to be fair, I think customers are going to start pushing it more, and I think social media now is playing a part in doing that. In that, if things continue to be broken, processes aren't aligned to what a company's talking about, then customers now are switching to social and are doing it quite quickly.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariana. Jerry, shall we move on?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Well, this follows on quite neatly from just one of the last couple of questions, in terms of whatever the nature of the company, whether it's B2B, B2C, whether it's high-end or sort of pound shop type thing, the principles are the same. So in the case studies we've just looked at, they're quite, we looked at some quite tactical issues that led to the results there. This is how, looking at now the kind of second part of the story, the chapter 2 about the strategic side of it. The key is here linking the reason why your business exists to customer experiences, stakeholder experiences, and employee experiences. And the gaps in the middle are fairly self-explanatory. We have any organization has its values that it runs by. It will have its commercial objectives. It'll have its operating strategy and its brand strategy, as Nicola was just talking about. What we see quite often is almost that's as far as a lot of organizations get. So they will have a brand strategy, but that's almost a communication strategy around the logos and the key messages. But actually, there's still a missing link between are the experiences that customers, stakeholders, employees have consistent with that brand strategy. The bit that's missing in the middle is the customer strategy. And this is the bit that a lot of these organizations are, we talked about the trigger, is it push or pull in terms of wanting to do more on the customer experience agenda. And sometimes it'll be that they'll notice they're losing market share and want to know why, or it could be that they just know they need to get on the front foot before the revenues and start going down and costs start going up. So that model would work for any kind of organization. So the theory is good, but a lot of organizations have this kind of approach. So what we've got here on the left hand side is a board or the senior management team. There are business units within an organization that are vaguely aligned, but a lot of their activities are not aligned. So some activities will reach the customer and they'll land spot on and be absolutely brilliant, but the same organization will be doing activities that don't land or completely miss the mark. So what we talk to organizations about is to try and make sense of all this, to try and bring a little bit of a discipline into the whole sort of way of operating, in as much as between the board or the senior management team, the leadership team, and the business units have a layer of customer experience governance, if you like. And that can be just a mindset, a way of thinking, a culture, or it could be a physical forum. Some organizations meet, they have people who will get together every single day, 8:30 every morning. They'll have a customer session for half an hour. What are we going to do today that is going to make our customer experiences better? Maybe a fortnightly forum, but it involves everybody from all over the organization, traditionally customer facing roles, sales, marketing, ops, but also the non-customer facing roles, finance, legal, HR. The upshot is that the activities start to become aligned and much more streamlined and much more straightforward, so the customer has a much more of a their experiences it's easier, it's simpler, it's not confusing. So that layer of governance is really important, and is ultimately where a lot of organizations want to get to. Nicola, do you want to touch on the NGN story?
Yeah, I'll just quickly, because you'll be able to, we're going to send the slides and we're going to post them on the Hive as well. So, but I'll just talk very quickly around what we're doing to support one of the HiveMind clients, which is Northern Gas Network. And what Northern Gas Network are, for those that aren't aware, is they actually provide the pipeline to the customer's home, but not into the home. That's where the retailer picks up the relationship. So they don't have a direct relationship with customers per se. The customer can't choose which gas network they get their gas provided from in the UK. But the Northern Gas Networks are really focusing on what could their customer experience strategy be, how can they shape it, and how can they evolve it as if they did sell gas directly to the customer. So this just demonstrates that you've got a B2B organisation who will probably always be a B2B organisation and has no control over what the customer or where the customer goes, but really actually want to put customer at the heart of what they're doing. So we're working with Northern Gas Networks around shaping their customer experience strategy. That's being done under a strapline of effortlessly done, so that everything they do, their colleagues do, is effortlessly done around their processes, their technologies, their policies, and their way of working. We're developing customer promises, and we're now detailing a 3-year roadmap to deliver that. Part of that roadmap includes us actually really truly understanding what their customer experience is like. So we've mapped both the current and now designed some future state journeys for 3 of their core interactions with customers. So for planned works where they're improving the network and have to under the jurisdiction of Ofgem, or where a customer may have an emergency. So they may have a gas leak and have contacted National Grid. So we're developing the current state and we're designing the future state journeys, how they can build on those improvements. We've also now devised 9 different customer personas, because they're dealing with, Joe Public, who doesn't even know who Northern Gas Network is, but then sees the road dug up. And now recognises a Northern Gas Network van, through to a customer who may have contacted them because they're concerned, as I said, about smelling gas in the area, and have been directed to them from the national operator. What we're also working on is how they can improve their voice of customer in the future. So how can they get what's called CSAT and Net Promoter Score at touch points? We're working on the internal voice of process. So that's how do they measure internally all of the measures across the organisation and the KPIs that would matter to the customer. So if the customer came into their organisation, what would a customer obsess most about? Not, some of the operational and financial measures that every business, quite rightly obsesses about, but it doesn't pay any regard to the customer. And then finally, around voice of employee. So what do the employees think about their services? As predominantly most of the employees actually live in their patch in the UK. Moving around the circle, we're also looking at the operating model. So this is where we're looking at a brand new and working with colleagues in the HiveMind network to look at a new customer experience system. And we're doing that now through Agile and accelerated delivery deployment. We're looking at all the processes that underpin that. And we're taking the opportunity now to actually cut and eradicate, dumb things that don't make any sense to the customer nor the organisation, right through to looking at unified comms. And then in the top left-hand box, starting to now deploy some of the things around customer experience, but actually around colleague experience. So we've identified and designed the colleague journeys. And colleague journeys can be things like, and it's things that matter most to the colleagues, how do I get paid? How do I book a holiday? Booking a meeting room. You can't understand how much pain that causes people in an organisation when it's quite a cumbersome and frustrating process. Through those journeys, then, we've identified 11 different colleague personas. And why this matters is because they're going through an inordinate amount of change. And therefore, we want to try and understand those different persona types of the colleagues, and therefore, how do we differentiate how we could deploy things, right through to looking at collaboration tools again with HiveMind colleagues. So that's just, on a page, the Northern Gas Network story in terms of what we're supporting there. Just
Nicola,
a couple of questions come through.
Nicola, before you ask the question, I'm going to give you a time check, but
Yep.
I've decided that this is such a good presentation. I don't want to cut it off artificially. So we're going to extend this meeting until people get tired of it.
Okay. We won't extend it by too much, but it's, as you say, we've got a couple of questions. So, Sandy, your key question is, will your current customer experience survive the omni-channel tsunami? I think, as you say, it's really, really good question. And I think for those businesses that, haven't got a clearly defined customer experience strategy, or are even, starting at understanding what the customer journeys are, your customers are going to do it for you. Jerry, we got asked, didn't we? I think in one of the clients we were working in, well, what is this customer experience? And almost by default, every company has got a customer experience. Your customer knows what it is, they're feeling it, they're thinking it every single day. So, absolutely, if you're not doing something, then I don't think those businesses are going to survive the omni-channel tsunami. Jonathan Yarmis, your question, do you get into issues of CX across online and virtual world, and how to rationalize the two? Yeah, absolutely. And I think this whole, probably the whole subject of communities, I don't know whether have anybody, certainly those colleagues outside of the UK, but there's organisations now like giffgaff, who are a telco in the UK, who are actually using communities, and other customers, to answer other customers' queries, and also to help define what products and services they should be designing in the future. And I know, there's certainly, again, one big global online retailer that's certainly looking at the use of the whole online and virtual world and rationalizing the two, and almost, merging the two into one, in that, customers and communities can almost, self-manage, self-operate, and self-moderate themselves. So I think, yeah, again, I think that's going to be a growth area in the future. And then another question we've got from Klaus, how does CX work for public organisations? Again, a really good question. Jerry, do you want to cover that one off? Because I know, again, we've talked to a few councils, and certainly HMRC, which is Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in the UK, is certainly looking at now citizen experience, and how we use, how we transact with organisations. But Jerry, do you just want to jump in there with, what some of the councils are looking at?
Yeah, so yeah, you mentioned HMRC. One of the other government departments that gets a lot of credit is the car tax.
DVLA.
Just because they make it so easy. In terms of councils, we've been talking to some councils who are looking at kind of what is their citizen experience. What is it like to live in a particular city? And there's been a lot of work in the States done on this. Just to again, it comes back to those basic principles of what do you want it to be like, what is it like, and how do you close the gap. Interestingly, just on the government side of things in the UK, we're heading into a general election next year, and there was an interesting conversation last week on one of the TV, it was Question Time, but it talked about if the major parties don't have a really, really clear idea of what their citizens, their voters want, that's going to play into the hands of other smaller parties who are sort of nipping around the heels of them. And the same applies to business. And it kind of, so you could see a role for the customer experience, the voter experience in government. So I think the public sector, probably traditionally a little bit behind the curve, but they've definitely, again, for all the reasons we talked about, this is a commercial way of thinking. Cost savings by putting the right experiences in. That applies as much to the public sector as private sector.
Absolutely. And I think it plays back to also this omni-channel tsunami, in that, again, as consumers, even in public sector organisations such as the police force, social media is playing a huge part. So I think those public sector organisations, again, in the UK and outside of the UK and the US and further afield, are doing it well, where they're clearly defining what their customer, who may be the public, what their customer strategy is. Okay. Yeah. Jerry, if you want to move.
So the final chapter that we were going to talk about this evening is around the employee engagement, and that's been a constant theme through pretty much all of the slides that we've looked at. Just a couple of sort of figures and one story to finish off. This was a study by Gallup, who did some research to show that the damaging impact of having disengaged employees. And their study showed that if the ratio of engaged employees to disengaged employees was it was sort of 10 to 1, so there's 10 times as many engaged as disengaged, then the earnings growth was well over 100% a year. So, sorry, over Nicola, was this a 5-year study? Can you remind me?
It was, yeah, and it was a global study. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but contrast that though with if there are half as many disengaged employees as engaged, then the growth is in negative territory, and that's just purely around the financial impact of having disengaged employees. The other statistic on the other side, that when organizations successfully engage their customers and their employees, so both of them, they have tremendous growth in the right business outcomes, and the emphasis there is on the right outcomes, because anybody could have a customer experience, they could have wow customer experiences, but if it's not the right one for their business, their employees, then they're not going to get those type of those figures. The other part of the Gallup survey was the cost. So this is in the UK, to put some pound notes on the cost, and where they did a survey of organisations where 17% of the employees were engaged, 57% weren't engaged, and that left 26%. So just over a quarter were not engaged at all, and that was costing those organisations in the region of £70 billion a year in the UK through the sort of rework that we talked about earlier, through just people living with broken processes, through people shrugging their shoulders and saying, do you know what, I can't help you, go to a competitor. Contrast that with the likes of Ritz-Carlton, or whose services, if I don't know the answer, I will find it and I'll get it for you. With Disney, who will put things right, who with Lakeland in the UK, who just have a very simple philosophy that all their people are there to just, if somebody has bought something they don't like, or it turns out it's wrong, there's just no questions asked, and that creates a really, really engaged employee workforce, and therefore customer experiences.
Absolutely. Colin's just made a good point there, Jerry, just to say, because that whole approach goes hand in hand, with the agile approach of engaged, self-managed and organized teams. So, a byproduct of, working in a more collaborative way, delivering things, in bite-sized chunks that give benefit to the business and to customers. Another huge benefit as a product of that is, highly engaged colleagues, because they feel they're actually making a difference.
And they feel trusted and they feel valued. And one of the examples I always come back to is South American airline. As all airlines, each of their employees has $1,000 kitty. So if they are approached by a customer with a problem, they've got $1,000 to put it right. Just do what you need to do to put it right. And if you abuse it, it'll get taken away. But the point is that their colleagues are treated with respect. They're trusted to do the right thing. And they will do it on the front line. They're not going to wait for the regulator to tell them what the right thing to do is, as some of the banks in the UK have found out over the last few days. So there's it's no coincidence then that some of the organisations that we talk about when we talk about fantastic customer experiences, the likes of Zappos, Google, Salesforce US, the Army Savings Deposit Bank, they are also in the Fortune 100 best companies to work for. And the point on the right hand side there is that we're all people. All customers are people, employees are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. And it's a really fundamental principle, which I think is so true. And just finally, to bring that to life, this was, we as I said earlier, we did a piece of work with a retail energy company who they were, the leadership team, it's fair to say, were very relaxed, the fact that they had really, really good employee engagement. And they said, well, yeah, that's not the problem. The employee engagement isn't the problem. It must be something else. So we did a little bit of digging, and we uncovered the fact that the customer Net Promoter Score was -10. When we asked our employees, would you recommend this this energy company, or if you were a small business, would you use this organization? The NPS was -44. Absolutely appalling, very concerning. And yet the leadership team had no line of sight. The reason they thought they had really good employee engagement was because when the employee engagement survey came around, people were ticking the box to say, yes, I'm really proud to work here, I love it, because they thought that a high employee engagement score meant they got a bonus at the end of the year. The reality was, when we did a bit more digging, we said, okay, are you not proud to work here? What would, if somebody said, where do you work? If you met somebody at a dinner party or in a pub or a cafe, what would you say? And their response was, in many, many cases, was that they would either make something up or they would say they're unemployed, rather than say who they worked for. And it was a real light bulb moment for this organization. And again, coming back to bringing it to life, showing them the facts and the figures. What was happening was that although people were ticking the box to say we're engaged, the other said, no one will listen to us. There's no point in doing this work. We've said about these issues 20 times before, but nobody's done anything. And it was quite sad to see, actually, because there were some really, really good people who were just browbeaten and had, I think it's fair to say, Nicola, they'd given up, hadn't they?
Yeah.
But that gave us a starting point, and the customer experience work showed a number of actions that they could take, communication being one of them. Just say, yeah, guys, we're listening to what you say and we're going to do something about it, demonstrating it. Nicola talked about having experience makers, having just flip charts on the floor is just a tangible piece of evidence that things are starting to change, and it goes a million miles. So that was, sorry, Paul, conscious of time, we're just over past 6 o'clock in the UK. So Nicola, did you want to, and forgive me, I can't see the screen that says have we any questions. So
no, I think we're okay. We've not had any recently, so I will ask again just as we're finishing. So yeah, I think just to finish on a couple of stories, because customer experience is about a journey, and in most cases we describe customer experience in 3 components. It's about functionally what you do. It's about the accessibility, how easy is it to do for a customer to do what they need to do? And then it's about the emotional component of experience, how does it make you feel? And that can equally be applied to a colleague experience. So functionally, does the system that they use do what it needs to do? How accessible is it? Can they use it on a mobile device? Should they need to use it away from work? And then emotionally, how does it make them feel? Does it make them feel joyous, or does it make them feel really frustrated? We're all users and we're all customers of something. So, there's a great story here, a great quote from Bob Black, who's the managing director of TNT Express out in Australia. And I love this quote, having spent quite a few years in the logistics industry in the UK. And his quote was around, building great customer experiences which focuses on the customer's emotion is a journey, not a destination. Again, we get asked, if we do all of these things and it can be done in the next 12 months, that's it. Have we got up to that branded experience? The answer is no, because it's an evolution. It's not a revolution. Customers' expectations are changing. Other organizations are delivering experiences that are constantly evolving. So, it's all about really understanding, you want your people to behave in a more natural way, which is what Bob Black alludes to. We want them to fully understand the customer's emotions, and that's where personas can start to come in, and personalization, and really starting to empathize and making sure that both the customers and the colleagues are involved in that process and that process of change. So, it's not something you're going to correct overnight. It does take time. But that said, if you're not on that journey, and businesses that you're working with, if they haven't got a clearly defined customer experience strategy, or even understand the journeys that a customer goes on, then I suggest that they need to start and start pretty quickly. Because I think back to one of our attendees who said earlier, the omni-channel experience now, customers are just going to share it in a social domain.
Folks, this is great. I'm going to leave the conference open for anybody who wants to continue to ask questions. The folks who need to jump can jump. I want to thank you both. The directive was a 20-minute presentation. I'm going to give you leeway since there's two of you. I'm going to multiply that by 2, so you're just barely in under the wire.
Thank you.
Questions from others. Questions from others. Folks, you have a chance to drop in any other comments. I actually have one comment. I'm particularly pleased to understand that there seems to be less cultural differences, regional, country-wise cultural differences related to customer experience than I would have expected. Is that true, or is that just something you kind of glossed over in this presentation?
I think it's true, actually, Paul. I had the fortune to be out in the Middle East last week, and the challenges are exactly the same. Yes, there's some local cultural nuances, if you like, but in the same way that we had a really good question about is there a difference in terms of whether it's a high-end luxury service or good. No, the principles are the same, and it comes back to the point that Nicola was just making. Because we're all people, it's kind of, we need to understand, and yet there'll be local cultures and as I say, local differences. But on the whole, I think it's fair to say when we've been in and around Europe and the Middle East, certainly from my experience, the core principles are the same, and across industries as well. And I was at a large conference a few weeks ago, the airline and rail industries, and yeah, they're similarly juggling with the same kind of issues. Nicola, is that fair to say? From what
no, absolutely. I think Sandy's just typed a great quote. Nobody owns a customer, nobody owns a market. Someone can always take it away from you. So I love that. And what I'd also make the point about is it's about people. The only differentiator now in the virtual and digital world, omnichannel world, whatever we want to call it, but this hyper-connected world that we live in, the only thing that's a differentiator is people and experiences. So it's about trying to create that, highly engaged experience through great people. And for me, the one biggest thing I always say to organizations is, what the power is in your people. You need to have a great way of getting them to work together in a collaborative way. And that's why I'm a huge supporter from a, non-IT perspective of agile and accelerated delivery principles.
And just to emphasize that, what we're learning from observing agile principles being applied not to technology but to regular business processes is that this is a people-focused practice. It's a people-focused process change effort. And it has branches or it's connected to a variety of other topic areas and functional areas within a business. It isn't just isolated to the deployment of a technology product or service. It really has to do with the attitude that management takes, and then folks who are in the hierarchy of decision making, how the attitude they all take about how decisions get made and how work gets parceled out and measured across the entire organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Sandy, if I may just say thank you, Nicola, for acknowledging some of the things I typed. It was a bad connection, so I didn't have my my video on. But spot on. This was a brilliant presentation, and I love what you ended with the focus on the employees. It's more than disengagement. It's about engagement, and engagement with the people that are key to growing the company in a world that's now more mobile and more millennials who operate within all these channels that way. The customer people, the employees people are key. It's about people, process, and technology is just the enabler. But this was brilliant and so timely from so many ways. A lot of linkages Paul will explain, but especially I actually worked for TNT Express, so I like that even as well.
Brilliant. Please pass my thanks for Bob's comments then.
So we're going to keep, we're going to have this presentation available online so that you can review it and share it with others. We're going to skip our drop-in call for next Monday. We're going to have our next one on the 29th, 2 weeks from today. Same time, same station. So everybody gets a Christmas holiday break next week from drop-ins. This was a really well done presentation. I hope that folks will think about how to apply what you've learned here to the client organizations that you deal with, to be able to explain to them the way that HiveMind Network approaches a variety of topics that are linked to each other, that we are not just a point solution provider. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and Jerry and Nicola, if you can stay online.